Right, here we are where we left off in part 2, and if you like that, you're gonna love this, because we're going to be morphing the shape that represents the state of the icon. Now, ordinarily, the prospect of doing this using paths would be a daunting one indeed. And being the person who wrote the native implementation of what we're about to do, I can certainly understand why. But in this episode, we're going to be doing it using PureSwiftUI, and the extensions and layout guides therein make the whole process as easy as painting by numbers. But before we do that, we've got a bit of housekeeping to do, and then I'm going to whiz through the initial creation of the toggle state icon just so we can get to the juicy bit. The first thing I'm going to do is extract two constants out. We've got a button diameter ratio, which is a CG float of 0.9, and we've got a duration, which is a double that we're setting to 1. We're going to speed that up later, and now we've got those in place, I can replace the duration with the constant there, and then I can change the 0.9 to button diameter ratio. And then I want to go down here and set this calculate size function to private, as it should have been in the first place. Then I can fold that up, and then I want to go to the button, take this outer gradient and move it up to the file level. And now we've done that, we can twirl that up too. Now I'm going to grab the toggle frame shape and copy that, since it has several elements that we're going to find useful in our toggle state icon. So I'm going to select this, copy it, and then underneath the button, I'm going to stick it there. Now, while we need the styling function, the debug clause is going to be the same as the one from toggle frame. So let's extract that specific styling into a private extension on shape. Private extension on shape. We'll call it debug styling, which returns some view. And inside that, we're going to put this stroke right in there. And then we'll replace it with that. And then we can go up to the implementation inside the frame and replace that one as well. There we go. And we don't need the frame anymore, so let's twirl that one up as well. And now we're going to rename the toggle frame to toggle state icon. And we can get rid of pretty much everything inside the path. And then if we whiz back to our view, we can now refer to it. Toggle state icon, we passing in is on, and debug is equal to debug. But before we put the styling on, we need to make sure that it takes the right parameters. You can see the styling on the toggle frame takes a color. Now we copied that, but our styling is just going to need a line width. So we go down to the function and we just say line width is a CG float. And then in the else clause, stroke, style, we're going to initialize it with a line width of the one that's passed in and a line join of round. And then we can go back up here and use it. Styling with a line width that is 0.04 of the width. Now I also want to put a frame around this toggle state because I want it to be half the height of our toggle. Very easy. Frame, size, half height. And now we're in a good position to talk about the toggle state icon itself and how we're going to achieve this morphing. Because we've got to go from a circle to a vertical line. And in order to do that, we need to use Bezier curves so we can manipulate the points and the control points therein. Now, it's actually impossible to create a perfect circle using Bezier curves, unless you're using an infinite amount, I suppose, but we don't have time for that. Fortunately, we can approximate one using just 4. So let's talk about how we're going to do that. Let's say that we've got a perfect circle, and like every circle, this one has a radius. Let's add some center lines and also some offset lines. These lines are offset from the center lines by a value of 0.552 of the radius. That is the key to the whole thing. We can then draw a square around the circle, which we can then get rid of and replace with 4 curves connecting the points at which the center lines intersect the encompassing square. Then we can add markers where the offset lines cross the square. Now we can get rid of our guides and add the control point indicators to our curves. Finally, we move the control points for each curve so they match the position of the markers. The result is a shape practically indistinguishable from a true circle. And since we can easily model these constraints with the layout guides, recreating this is going to be a walk in the park. So as usual, I'm going to develop this in the body so we can have the advantage of real-time updates as we go. Even though I do know what this one's going to look like, it's a useful technique. We're going to set debug to true. And then underneath that, I'm going to use an immediately invoked closure expression, which is an extraordinarily useful way of grouping logic together that is only required to calculate a constant. Let state icon config, which is a layout guide config, equal to, and then we set up our closure there, remembering, of course, to invoke it at the end. And the first thing we need is that constant I mentioned. Let the control point offset ratio, which is a CG float, equal 0.552. And since the dimensions in a layout guide go from 0 to 1, half of that, which would be the radius of a circle which fits inside our layout guide, would be 0.5. So we need to multiply the control point offset ratio by that in order to get the actual offset that we're going to need. So let the control point offset in a unit square equal the control point offset ratio times 0.5. And then we can go ahead and define the array that is going to represent the columns and rows because they're going to be the same. Let columns and rows equal an array, the first of which is going to be 0. Then we have 0.5 minus the control point offset in a unit square, 0.5 for the middle one, 0.5 plus the control point offset in a unit square, and we finish with 1. And now we've got them defined, all we need to do is return our layout guide config. Return layout guide config of type grid, and we'll just use the columns and rows for both. So now we've got our layout guide for the state icon, but so we can see what we're doing, as well as putting the layout guide on top, I want to move that button into the middle so it can act as a backdrop. And for that, I'm going to make the X offset for that button on line 36 conditional on whether or not we're debugging. So I go down here and I say X offset, if not, debug. And since we are debugging, it's going to pop to the middle and serve as our background. And then I go down to our toggle state, layout guide, and say state icon config. And I'm going to give this one a color of red, a line width of 1, and an opacity of 1. So it's nice and easy to see. And there it is. And just so we can really see it, I'm going to give this a frame of 800, just while we're initially developing it. So that looks like the perfect layout guide. I knew it would be, so no surprises there. Now we're going to move that to the file level so we can use it when we're building our state icon. So we go up here, we grab this, cut it, and then we paste it here. And then we're just going to make it private. Now we don't need to see this definition anymore, so let's just fold that one up as well, and then we can resume. So let's go down to our toggle state icon and start developing this thing. As you know, when we're using layout guides, the first thing we do is lay it out. Let G equals state icon config laid out in our rectangle. And the first thing we want to do is to move to this point. Couldn't be simpler. Path, move, and we'll go to the leading point of the grid. And for the following 4 curves, I'm going to initially define them as having the control points on the same points, so we can bash it out quite quickly and then start moving the control points into their correct places. So I'm going to do it like this. Path, curve, we're going to the top. The control point 1 is going to be the top, and control point 2 is going to be the top. And then we're going to show the control points based on whether or not we're debugging. So I'm going to duplicate this 4 times. And then I can just change the points appropriately. Trailing. bottom, leading. And then we can just close the subpath. Now I admit that doesn't look much like a circle, but now we can start putting the control points in their correct places. So let's start with the control points for the top one, and we're going to put these control points here and here, which is 0, 1 and 1, 0. That's looking good. And we want to set the next control points here and here, which is 3, 0 and 4, 1. The next two are going to be here and here, which is 4, 3 and 3, 4. And lastly, we're going to use these 2 points, which are 1, 4 and 0, 3. So that's our circle, or at least our approximation to the circle. We need to animate it so it goes from a circle to a vertical line. So when it's on, it's the vertical line, and when it's off, it's the circle. And we're going to do that using one of my favorite extensions from PureSwiftUI, the To extension, which allows you to interpolate between 2 points based on a factor. In this case, we're going to use animatable data as that factor. So we just need to determine where we're going to move our points and control points in order to convert this circle into a vertical straight line. We're going to take a very simple approach to this. We're going to take all the points that aren't sitting on that vertical line in the center, and we're just going to move them to that center line. So let's start with the first point we moved to, the leading point, and we want that to go to the center. So we can go up to that point and say to G center, and we can pass in the animatable data as the factor. And since the toggle is on, that will immediately move to the center. So when we're done with the rest of these points, we should end up with a vertical straight line. Let's do the next one. This control point is going to this point, which is 2, 1, G 2, 1, animatable data. This next control point, which is at the top there, that's going to move in to the top. 2, G top, animatable data. The trailing point is going to move into the center as well. 2, G center, animatable data again. This control point is going to move to the top. 2, G top, animatable data. This control point is going to move into the same point as its opposite number. 2, G 2, 1. The bottom point is going to stay where it is, but the first control point is going to move to 2, 3. 2, G 2, 3, animatable data. The second control point is going to move to the bottom. And we're nearly there. We just need the leading point to move into the center. We need the first control point to move to the bottom. And then we need the second control point to move in to 2, 3. So now we've got our shape that will animate from a circle to a vertical straight line. I can prove that by taking animatable data, putting it here, and setting it to 0.5, for example, and you get one that is halfway between. So let's get rid of that, and then we can go back up to our view here, get rid of our frame, and then we can set debug to false. And as you can see, we need to make sure that our toggle state icon is on top of the button. The way we do that is by putting them both inside a group and then offsetting that group to the same specifications as outlined on line 37. So I'm going to say group, go down here, close it off, indent this slot, and I'm not only going to take the offset, but I'm also going to take the animation because they have to animate and offset in exactly the same way. So we move both of these down to the group level. And now that that's taken care of, we should see the state icon overlay the button, and when I click it, it will animate along with it. There we are. Now, can you see a small problem here? There it is. When it goes to a vertical line and when it goes from a vertical line, there's a bit of a spike. There's a bit of an inflection point, I suppose. And the reason we're getting that is because we are making the control points exactly the same as the point of a curve. And it kind of freaks out a bit, as you can see here. So the way we fix that is just by offsetting the point that the control points are going to by 1. So we can go down to our path. We're going to say that the control point 2 goes to top y offset by 1. Okay, so it's just under it. We're going to do the same thing for control point 1. It is also going to the top at this point. So now they go just below the top. And then for the bottom, we're going to do the same thing, but in the other direction. So we offset the ones going into the bottom by -1. And now if I click it, we shouldn't see any of those artifacts. We don't have any rotation of the icon going on yet, but I think we've gone on long enough for today. So we're going to get to that, as well as the rest of the finishing touches in the next episode. So join me for that. It's going to be brilliant. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more. It makes me happy, it lets me know that you're happy. Let's do it and bring everyone together in happiness, just like that. If you have any questions, comments or suggestions, please leave them below. But in the meantime, thanks for joining me. See you next time.